Hi there, my name is Shannon and I'm Willamette Week's music and visual arts editor. I'm here today with Jim Rice, who is the Stranding program manager at Oregon State University's Marine Mammal Institute. Jim, how are you hanging in there today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
So to start off, is there a sort of general process when responding to strandings?
There are definitely processes depending on the type of animal that's involved. By and large, most of the animals that I respond to are marine mammals, and they all fall under the purview of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA, or NOAA Fisheries, which is a specific agency. They have basically oversight over stranding networks all around the country, and they provide us with authority to respond to marine mammals that are on the beach because they are all federally protected animals. So everything I do is in accordance with them and their regulations. And by and large, my job is to document marine mammal strandings, to investigate causes of mortality, look at disease processes that are involved, and try to mitigate as best as we can problems that these live animals might be facing on the beaches. One thing I should point out is we do not in Oregon have marine mammal rehabilitation as an option in the vast majority of cases. We don't have facilities for marine mammal rehab, and we don't have authority, frankly, with the state. There is a policy that actually prohibits marine mammal rehabilitation in the state of Oregon. So we, by and large, are dealing with live and dead animals, primarily dead animals, and investigating, why animals end up stranded and trying to keep track of them as best as we can, looking at trends, what species are involved, what times of year, and whatever ancillary information we can gather around those events.
Right. So then what happens if you do come across if the animal that's stranded is still alive? What happens then?
By and large, we have a volunteer go out and assess the animal, collect documentation, so take photographs, try to get a good idea as to what sort of condition the animal is in physically. And in many cases, try to control the environment to some extent so we can try to prevent the animal from being harassed. Whether it's intentional or not, when people see a seal or sea lion on the beach, they're often drawn to that animal. They want to get close to it. They want to see what's going on. They often assume that the animal is critically ill simply because it's on the beach, when in fact many seals and sea lions come ashore on a regular basis just to get rest. So a lot of what they do, a lot of what we do, our volunteers do, and what I do is assess an animal situation and then decide, is this an animal that is indeed stranded, or is it more likely just on the beach resting if it's a live animal?
Are there sort of like is there basically a peak stranding season here in Oregon? Like for instance, I know for sea turtles it's winter due to the water and tide conditions, but yeah.
Yes, there are different seasons for different types of animals. So as you mentioned, sea turtles typically strand this time of year when the waters are getting colder. I should point out sea turtles really don't belong in the Pacific Northwest. They're not adapted to withstand the cold temperatures that are normal in the Pacific Northwest. And the fact that we end up having sea turtles up here is sort of an anomaly, I think. It's not a typical part of their range. They can't really survive here indefinitely. But we do typically find sea turtles on beaches in Oregon during November and December in particular, and these animals end up hypothermic. They or cold stunned, as we say. They're basically inoperable. They're unable to function in cold water. We also tend to get dolphin strandings during the winter months, and we don't often think of dolphins associated with the Oregon coast, but we generally get a half dozen or so dolphin strandings a year, and quite often these are dolphins that are usually in warmer water, and for some reason they end up in the Pacific Northwest, close to shore, and they will sometimes succumb to infections that affect their brains and parts of their central nervous system. And there's whale strandings that can occur throughout the year, really depending on what's going on. We get entanglements of whales typically during the spring and summer months. So there's quite a number of different peaks, I guess, as the year goes on, depending on the type of animal that you're talking about.
So in terms of the animals like, dolphins and sea turtles that don't typically belong here, is there sort of a united reason why these different species keep ending up on our shores? Is it, the El Nino and the blob ocean warming stuff? Or yeah, why does this keep happening?
That's a good question. I don't think we have conclusive answers to tell you. It's mostly anecdotal at this point. I can say, we've been seeing an increase in dolphin strandings over the last 10 or 15 years. And a fair number of those dolphins have succumbed to a disease called neurobrucellosis, which is a bacterium brucella, which is within some of these dolphin populations, the striped dolphin in particular. But why they're becoming affected more readily now, it's not something I can answer specifically, but it does make you wonder if maybe warming waters have something to do with it. We've seen a few species that haven't been reported in Oregon before. We had some spotted dolphins strand this past summer in Pacific City. That's a species we had absolutely no records of only a couple of years ago. And this is the second event. We had one animal in particular back in 2012 strand. That was the first one on record. And then we had two strand together in this separate event this past summer. Again, warm water species that are not typically found in the Pacific Northwest. Anecdotally, we can say, yeah, we're seeing an increase in water temperatures. We're seeing an increase in species that are not known to be found in this area. And we're seeing other species, non-marine mammals that are showing up as well. Moa, ocean sunfish have been showing up fairly regularly on beaches in the last few years. Those are a type of fish that are not typically found in the cold waters of the Pacific Northwest. And there have been, countless other examples, I guess, of oddball species showing up here and there. So as time goes on, we're starting to see, trends as events sort of add on to each other. But again, I don't have a clear quantitative analysis I can give you about what's driving these changes yet, anyway.
So kind of a silly question. I know you guys aren't actually 911 for marine mammals, but you do have a tip line and stuff. Do you get sort of like absurd tips or questions from people that don't actually apply to your agency?
Yes, absolutely. And that is something that has been an issue off and on over time. I should say all of the calls that come in go to a state police tip line. So I also have basically a hotline that comes directly to me. And we will sometimes get calls about things like sea stars that come ashore or algae blooms even. Any number of things. We've also had a number of terrestrial mammals end up on beaches. We've had bears and cows and beavers and just some oddball things that probably end up, floating down a river and end up on a beach after, being awash and drifting for some time. Yes, I am sort of a go-to for some things like that. Also birds, I get a lot of calls about birds, and I don't work with birds in any way. So in some cases I can refer a caller to a wildlife rehabilitator, but in many cases there just aren't any places to send a bird to. So, the Oregon shore, the ocean shore of the Oregon coast is a wild place, and there's a lot of things that just have to go naturally, and it's best not to try to intervene in a lot of cases because there isn't much that can be done. And natural processes will happen, and sometimes we'll have live animals that are dying, and we just have to let nature take its course. It can be tough, especially if people that are observing it and they want something to be done to rescue the animal, to help. We just don't have the means to do it in the majority of cases. There are some exceptions. If we have a federally listed species like a Guadalupe fruit seal that's sick or injured, we can potentially send that animal to a rehab facility down in California. But by and large, I document around 500 mortalities a year. So, and that's just what I'm knowing, what I'm hearing about, what I have reported to me and what I can find out about. There's probably quite a bit more that I never know about. And I urge people to please let me know if they do have any information about a stranded marine mammal, so I can investigate it and document it and tally it and make sure it's recorded properly, so we have a good understanding of what's happening with marine mammals overall.
Don't call you though if they find a bear, which is shocking.
If they know it's a bear, yes. I realize that a lot of people don't necessarily know what it is that they're looking at. They will make all sorts of guesses, and it behooves me to try to educate folks as best as I can and let them know, what types of animals are actually out there. I've had people report polar bears to me or walruses, things that are not on the Oregon coast, although I suppose they could appear here. Odd things do happen. There have been Arctic seals that have come down south. We've had ribbon seals in Washington State. And I know on the East Coast, I used to work on the East Coast, we used to have Arctic seals come down the eastern seaboard quite a bit. And 20, 30 years ago, that would have been unheard of. So I never say never, because sometimes things happen that you would never expect and you would swear up and down is impossible. And then sure enough, something like that might happen.